Milestone 1 relates to preliminary assessment, which is about doing a baseline assessment. It's about conducting audits. Where is there inequality within this particular local council area? What information can we use? What resources are there? What are the target groups? The second is preparing a human rights implementation plan on the basis of that. So you can see from our first finding that there needs to be a clear set of strategies around identifiable groups. You need to prepare how you're going to address that. What sort of changes are there going to be to your strategic documents, to your policies, to your principles? Not just to legal compliance with rights, but all the way through the organisation. Which are the most important? What can you do this year? What needs to be done next year? What are the priorities? Which policies are going to make most change? In terms of the acting stage, there are a number of different milestones there. Governance, for example, it's about citizen access to local government. It's about deliberative democracy. It's about listening to people. How do you involve people in the decision-making that goes on within the councils? How do you get community views? Some of the people who we interviewed expressed the view that sometimes consultation was seen by councillors to be inefficient. But the point is that it produces better outcomes. It produces results that people can engage with. It produces results that they like better. It produces results that they've asked for. So in many senses, the arguments about inefficiency have to be set against services that are done on the basis of something that it doesn't fit with people's views and aspirations. So we have to think very carefully about how we involve people. Local laws for the conduct of meetings and how people are involved. A community engagement strategy, and so on and so forth. In terms of councillors, training for councillors, helping them to see the relevance of this to their job and to making their communities better. Induction training, and so forth. Again, laws, compliance with the law. We had one local authority that we worked with whose primary focus was on legal compliance, and they'd obviously used law firms to make sure that all their policies and documents and local laws were HR compliant, human rights compliant. But without any other strategy, nothing else was going to happen. So the law is not everything. It's part of the whole story. And if we're going to have a human rights-based approach, if we're going to, in fact, affect people's lives, it has to filter down. It has to sift down. Administrative arm procedures developed for internal implementation, identify and the key policies and review them, and then work through human resources around training, induction, code of conduct, and so forth. In the community, obviously there are issues around service delivery. So where human rights affects things at the strategic level, as you move down the organisation to the providers of services, you then want to ask yourself, what sorts of policies do those organisations have which will actually have a bearing upon people's experience of services in terms of their human rights? How can we adjust those policies? What is the relevance of the Human Rights Act? What does the Charter do for us? And how can we place those into policies in ways that change behaviour and in ways that change interaction, not just in ways that change the law. So it has to filter down. It's a big job, and I think the important point that was made earlier about equal opportunities is one which really rings true here, is it is something that is developmental. It is not something that is a given. We have to work at it until the culture becomes acculturated fully and people understand it and pursue it as a matter of course. Okay. And then we've got things here about how you work with the community, surveys. It might be through engaging in community forums. It might be through questionnaires. It might be through targeting particular groups and working with self-advocacy movements or carers groups and so forth. And community information. Again, how do you provide that in ways that are plain, straightforward, understandable, doable, engaging, not in ways that are tied up with organisation speak, that are difficult, and so forth. Milestone 6 was third-party contractors, and there's some debate and deliberation at the moment over whether those contractors fit into the category of public authority and whether not. So there are issues here about how you write your procurement policies and what sort of ways in which tenders take into account how organisations that are being brought in fit their own policies to a human rights framework. And then finally, the monitoring, review and reporting, which is the sheet that I've handed out to you. All of those that I've described here are described more fully and resources provided to support each of them in the document that has been produced. But there is also a necessity to measure the outcomes, and the document that I've given you is about some of the outcomes which relate to each of the different levels in terms of measuring outcome. 2 minutes? Okay. So, that's it. No. Okay. So, what we've done is we've got several outcomes set out at different levels. They can be either early stage, which means that the council probably hasn't really started that particular measure at all. Strong indicators, very strong indicators. And we also have an indication from the tool as to how they would measure that and self-rate themselves. So what we're seeking through this tool is to get councils to review every year where they are in terms of the implementation of human rights based on a model which deals with a culture of rights, not just one that deals with legal compliance. I was going to go through a couple more issues, but I think I have to go on towards the next phase. Having reached the phase we have reached, which we've done in a fairly quick amount of time, what the Department of Justice is going to fund next year is a piece of work which sees that human rights value and flourish in Victorian communities by further developing the work that we've done, providing intensive support this time to 5 collaborating authorities to develop the approach and framework that we've actually ended up with from the research, to refine a manual and toolkit as well. And also we're going to develop something called the Yellow Pages, which is a Yellow Pages of resources that are available for people for the implementation of human rights, from which councils can choose in terms of adopting their own particular approach. We are also thinking about how to engage with a train-the-trainer model so that capacity is built into the different councils in the work that they do. And we will ensure that local governments assist and value add to the state government's intentions by implementing the Charter at local level. So that is a very, very quick rehearsal of the issues that we've been trying to deal with here. And I think you can tell that it's very early stage, and as the reporting has shown, the councils are slow to move. I think if we can carry on this process and then move over time to thinking about how we increase the level of awareness around human rights and also make sure that people begin to experience it in their everyday lives, then it will become demand-led rather than supply-led. And I have a really difficult feeling at this stage of any new development that in some ways there is a danger that ultimately what is done will be imposed rather than created by those people who are at the end of a disadvantage.